Hey, in this video, we're going to go ahead and we're going to be covering a lot of different topics when it comes to guns right here. We're going to cover cleaning, intentional, unintentional discharges, obviously what happens if we drop our gun and things like that. Let's go ahead and let's take it to the classroom so we can cover all these topics in one place. Stay with us.
These are cleaning products that you can get. I don't recommend any 3-in-1 stuff like CLP, cleaning lubricant, and protector. And the reason is, if it does 3 things, it probably doesn't do one of them as good as it could, right? I would much rather have a cleaner, a lubricant, right? I would much rather they not try to do the same jobs, because how is it dissolving carbon and lubricating my gun, right? For field expediency, when I go hunting, yeah, I just have some CLP in my hunting kit because that makes life easier, right? And I'm not firing a bunch of rounds or anything, right? It works for what I'm doing, but for carry and everything else, not generally what we want. There are 3 types of discharges: accidental, intentional, and unintentional. An accidental discharge is a mechanical failure of the weapon. The sear broke, the safety broke, the hammer broke, whatever, something broke and caused the weapon to fire when it shouldn't have. If I'm taking reasonable care of my gun, then it's accidental because no reasonable effort on my part could have been taken to avoid that. It's just like an accident on the road. An accident applies that it's nobody's fault. There aren't very many accidents on the road. There's a lot of collisions though, right? Somebody's probably at fault for why the gun went bang. So we get into those 2, the intentional and the unintentional. The intentional is easy. I put my finger on the trigger, I pulled the trigger, and it went bang. That's the vast majority of all discharges, right? I meant for the gun to fire, I fired the gun, it fired. That's an intentional discharge, right? An unintentional discharge has 2 different ways: voluntary and involuntary. So an unintentional discharge means the gun went bang and I didn't mean for it to. So if it was a voluntary unintentional discharge, I did all of the stuff necessary to make the gun go bang, but I didn't mean for it to go bang. Usually that's where you hear, I didn't think it was loaded, right? I pulled the trigger, I did whatever, it went bang, I didn't mean for it to go bang, I didn't mean to fire that shot, right? Then you have involuntary. So there's 3 separate categories of an involuntary discharge. An involuntary discharge is I didn't mean for the gun to go bang, I didn't intentionally do the stuff to make it go bang, right? I wasn't trying to do that. So we get 3 methods of that. A balance disruption, what's that mean? I'm walking, put my finger on the trigger, and I fall. Crank. Round goes off, right? We got my startle response. I'm standing here doing something, the bad guy's up there, I'm telling him, don't do that, you can't have my wallet, and it scares me and I go bang, right? And then the last one that you can see that's up there is a sympathetic reflex. Sympathetic reflex is a dangerous thing. This is why Matt was talking about keeping the finger along the frame and moving the weapon out of the way, right? Especially if the guy comes in and I have to grab and stop this hand's gonna do the same thing. Female deputy goes on scene. They had a stolen car with a car chase. They got the guy, that officer's on the ground cuffing him up, and she's covering him. She has a Beretta 92 FS, if you're familiar with it. Hammer-fired gun, takes 12 pounds of pressure to make that gun go bang. She's watching the guy get cuffed. She has her finger on the trigger, and she keys up her radio to tell dispatch what they're doing. When this hand does this hand does this. It didn't make her popular. They got super lucky. There was some bullet fragmentation. It missed everybody. It didn't really hurt anybody. Super lucky, right? And you saw the gun change. She was pointed at that guy, and then when she went to talk, the gun moved off target, and that's when it fired, and that saved her from going to jail. It's a big deal in law enforcement when you discharge a weapon and you shouldn't. It doesn't even matter if nobody gets hurt. It doesn't even matter if it's in your own home. Crank around off in your own home as a police officer, and they are gonna hammer you for it, which they should. Dropping weapons. Generally speaking, most modern day semi-automatic weapons and revolvers are drop safe. I could take the weapon on my hip right now, I'm not going to, and chuck it across the room, fully loaded, it's not gonna go off suddenly. It has multiple safeties inside of it to prevent such a thing from happening. Every gun up here on the pistol side does. When you get into the rifles and the shotguns, not as much. The rifle here has a safety on it which prevents me pulling the trigger. right? So we've got the clear gun still. The safety is on, it physically gets in the way of me pulling the trigger. So I can't make it go bang versus the safety being off and it going when it's supposed to. It, however, is not doing anything but blocking the trigger. So if I jarred the gun hard enough, I could get the surface of the trigger that's catching the hammer to let go when the hammer would fire. If I butt stroke someone hard enough, I could get the firing pin that's inside, because it's inertia driven, it's free floating I should say, the firing pin could move hard enough to stop against that primer and set it off. The weapon, if dropped this way, will not fire. This weapon dropped this way or this way could fire, and that usually takes a little over 6 feet and about 10 miles an hour of movement for it to make that happen. But you'll see people, they'll tell you if you're to drop your gun, you just drop it that way. You toss it out flat and it won't go. You don't have to worry about it. Same thing with the shotgun, same issues apply on that. It's got the exact same type of safety inside of it. Why do I tell you this? When you're practicing and you start practicing for speed, it's only a matter of time before you forgot to hold onto the gun while you drew it, right? I know that sounds like it won't happen and everybody's like, what kind of dumbass would do that? Pretty much every person who's ever worked speed will eventually toss their gun across the range. And we'll all laugh at you, we'll pick up your gun, we'll dust it off, we'll hand it back to you, right? It's gonna happen. Why? Because you start pushing the envelope and you pushed a little too hard, right? And the gun went flying. So it's drop safe, not grab safe, right? So it won't fire if I throw it on the ground, but if I drop it and go while I'm trying to catch it, if I go while I'm trying to catch it, it's not moron safe. Right? If I pull that trigger trying to catch that gun, which is highly likely because there's a big ring right here that my finger can go in, right? Booger, hook, bang, switch, that's the problem that happens here. I want to be careful of that. When would I tell you to grab a gun that's falling? On the range, in practicing, there's no issue, right? Just let it go, everybody will be safe, we'll pick it up. I'm fighting for my life and I'm getting pounded on and I drop my gun, yeah, I'm probably gonna go to grab it. Right? Because if it does unintentionally fire while I'm going to grab it, I'm gonna deal with that right now because I'm about to die. If you shoot your hand from 6 feet away, the bullet, assuming it misses all bone, right, it goes in between the bones, will pass cleanly through your hand. It's not a big deal. Same thing here, like if it hits this meat, it hurts, right? They're gonna bandage you up, give you some antibiotics, tell you to walk it off, right? You're gonna be fine. Full use of the hand will restore, everything's fine. Because there wasn't enough mass to get the bullet to start acting like a hollow point. It didn't encounter enough resistance to start opening up. When you're in contact with the weapon and it fires, this is different. There's still not enough mass to get the bullet to expand. The problem is there's a column of expanding gas from the gunpowder riding behind that bullet. And when the bullet makes the hole in your hand, the gunpowder is going to go in right after the bullet. The problem is the bullet won't make a hole outside of your hand until it gets there and the gunpowder column of air is right behind it. So it's gonna fill your hand with expanding gases, and the damage is going to come from that expanding gas cloud hitting your hand and wanting to get away. Because if you do what you're supposed to do with these, nobody's gonna get hurt. You start forgetting, you start skipping steps, you start not respecting it, crap happens, right? I know people who, once the gun is clear, they'll point it at other people and practice with it. I refuse. I won't do that, I won't conduct training like that. I refuse even to pick one of these guns up without verifying that it's empty, right? Once we've rule of thirds it, I'll pick them up and manipulate them. You guys know that we're not adding ammunition to these up here. We're all watching them, right? I refuse to cut corners on safety because that's the problem. You will never have an unintentional discharge at home, a negligent discharge at home or anywhere else if you continue to treat the weapon as if it's loaded with respect. It just won't happen. You won't ever have to worry about it. It won't be a problem.